and smile.
All right. Oh, let me go ahead and make sure I'm on the right slide here. All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Fernando Angelucci. I'm the storage stud. And today we're going to be talking about self-storage. Now, before we get into our topic today, I just wanted to summarize the basic points on why I invest in self-storage. So, number one, it has the highest return historically versus any other real estate asset. It is very recession tolerant or recession resilient. It provides great leverage. The banks are giving us fantastic loans right now, even post-COVID. Much easier management than single-family or multifamily homes. It's a very fragmented market, which lends itself to opportunity. Low break-even occupancies, which allow us to weather any type of dips in the economy. Easy evictions, because we're not guided by tenant-landlord law, but actually guided by lien law or property law, which is much more advantageous for the owner. Has a very high sticky factor, so when you raise rents, most of your tenants will stay put. And then there's multiple ancillary profit centers that you can cash flow from other than just renting a unit. So today we're going to be talking about self-storage underwriting. It's one of the topics that's near and dear to my heart. I love self-storage facilities, and I love that everyone's getting into self-storage, but you just want to make sure that you're getting yourself into a good deal and not just doing a deal for doing a deal's sake. So today we're going to cover how to analyze traffic counts, what are the demand drivers and demographics you're looking for when you're looking at a potential self-storage facility or development site, how to do a competition study, how to do a supply and demand analysis, which will produce a supply index number, and then property analysis. Now, usually what we'll do is each one of these is like a funnel. So as a deal comes in, if the traffic counts are there, we won't go to the demand drivers. If the demand drivers aren't there, then we won't go to the competition study. If the competition study proves unadvantageous, we won't do the supply index number. And if the supply index number is too high, we will not do a property analysis. This allows me to underwrite anywhere between 5 to 10 properties a week. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to explore one of the properties that I bought last year and use that as the subject property for this underwriting so you can see exactly what I did before I decided to purchase this property. Here it is. It's in Danville, Illinois, which is central Illinois. It's 194 units. It is all drive-up units that are non-climate controlled. So this is what we would consider a first-generation self-storage facility or a Class C self-storage facility. It has 12 buildings, 1 office, and 1 home. The manager actually lives in that home. And here's what it looks like. This is what we'd consider a value add project. There is a lot of deferred maintenance. The asphalt needs to be done. The paint needs to be done. There's an old house where the manager lives. And this part of the facility is gravel as opposed to being paved. There's no fencing in place. Which is not necessarily a bad thing, but it lends itself for an opportunity to do a value add. All right, so let's go over traffic counts. Typically, tenants choose facilities that they've seen before. Self-storage is an asset class that serves people in transition. That may be someone that is getting a new job, is moving, needs additional storage space, is a business that would rather just rent out a unit as opposed to buying their own warehouse. Now, because of that, a lot of the tenants in the past, historically, they don't even see your self-storage facility for the 5 years that they drive past it until the day that they need storage. And all of a sudden they remember seeing it in their subconscious. Nowadays, though, internet and cell phones have dampened this effect slightly, but it's still very important, especially for older generations and smaller towns that may not be as tech savvy. But as a rule of thumb, about 60% of our clientele now come from this right here, from a mobile phone. A mobile phone is where they start their search. So let's go ahead and analyze our subject property in Danville, Illinois. I pull these traffic count data from the State Department of Transportation. So since this is in Illinois, I went to IDOT's website. And easiest thing you can do is just Google Illinois traffic counts, and it'll bring you to the website with the link that you need. A good rule of thumb is that you'd like about 12,000 vehicles per day or better for your first facility. Once you start becoming a better, more sophisticated self-storage owner, then you can start making exceptions to that rule. But for your first facility, I'd like to see at least 12,000 cars per day. So let's go ahead and take a look. As you can see here, the curb cut, which is North Avenue, is 5,700. Secondary road that feeds into the curb cut is Main Street. That's 9,100 cars per day. And then Main Street is fed by I-74, which has 25,000 cars per day. So that's a pretty good number. The signage is very visible, and the market supports these types of properties here. Okay, so we did the traffic counts. There are our resulting numbers. Now let's look at the demand drivers and the demographics. About 70% of your tenant base are residential tenants, meaning they are just a homeowner that's looking to store their surplus of goods or whatever they have to store. So that's going to be the majority of your population at a self-storage facility. Only 27% of those residential tenants live in apartments. So that's one of the things that when I first got into this business was very surprising to me, because I always thought, well, the only people that need storage are the people that don't have any room, which are people in tiny little apartments in the middle of downtown, large cities. Well, that turns out to not be the case. 67% of these residential tenants actually live inside of a single family home. And of those single family home customers, 65% have garages, 47% have an attic, and 33% have basements. So it's not that they're lacking in storage in their personal residence, but what I think it is the culture that we have in the United States of buying things to fill the space we have, as opposed to being a little bit more lean. So these are all good things for self-storage. The next, and what I think are some of the best types of customers, are your commercial customers. These are usually small businesses, police departments, law firms, warehouses, contractors. Now, they only account for about 17% of your customer base, but they're the best tenants because they usually have the longest average lease term. They usually stay on average 25 months at a time. They will typically rent multiple units, 3 to 5, maybe 7 units. And they'll usually pay a couple months up front, 3, 6, 9 months up front, because they want to lock in their rate over a long period of time. Now, a few other demand drivers that are important to look at are students. They only account for about 6% of your customer base, but they can have a big effect on the occupancy because these tenants on average will stay about 3.5 to 4 months. And it's usually during the summertime, as opposed to, lugging all of their stuff home over the summer. They just go find a self-storage facility nearby their college or their university. They'll store their stuff for 3 to 4 months. And then when school's back in session, they'll cancel their leases. So you got to be very careful when you're underwriting facilities next to schools. Another subclass that is very important to pay attention to are military personnel. So if you're looking at facilities that are near military bases, you need to be very careful because military are the only customers in self-storage that have special rights. You cannot auction off their units, especially if they've been deployed. So usually what we do is if there is a military customer, we usually just ask them to put their commanding officer's contact information on their lease application. So if there is any problems with payment and we all of a sudden get a delinquent customer that's in the military, we'll usually just call their commanding officer and say, hey, Mr. CO, one of your personnel hasn't been paying. We're just wondering what's going on. Has he been, shipped out, or what's the deal? And that usually solves a lot of problems very quickly. Now let's look at some more demand drivers. Again, because residential tenants are the largest tenant type that we have, customer type that we have, we want to make sure that we're buying facilities or building facilities in areas that are nearby dense residential. So here's that Danville property the subject property that we're underwriting here. And you can see all of these homes right nearby, all within one block. Then when you zoom out a little bit, you see even more homes to the west. Now let's look at demographics. First, what we need to do is create a trade area. And this is usually a radius around your facility. The reason why is the type of geography you have is going to affect the amount of tenants that will visit, or potential customers that will visit your facility. So in urban cores like downtown Chicago or New York, usually the trade area is only about 1 mile. In suburban areas, usually about a 3 mile trade area will capture 90% of your tenant base. Exurbs are suburbs that have just become suburbs. They just recently transitioned from a rural, corn and soybean or cotton into suburbs. So they're still a little spread out. And then fully rural areas, we like to create a trade area that's about 5 to 10 miles wide. So the reason why is because about 90% of your tenants will come from this area, and it's usually based off of drive time. So in the middle of an inner city, it may take you 15 minutes to go 1 mile, whereas if you're in a rural area, it may take you 15 minutes to go 10 miles. The reason this is so important is because storage is highly localized. So what I mean by that is you can't put these blanket statements like you can with multifamily when you say, Chicago is overdeveloped, or New York is overdeveloped, or Des Moines is overdeveloped. You can't say that with storage. What you can ask is, well, what parts of Chicago are overdeveloped? Because again, because of these small trade areas, you'll be able to find underserved pockets of 3, 5, or 10 mile radiuses or radii in some of these quote unquote overserved markets. So what we use to do these demographic studies is we use a free mobile app called SiteWise Mobile to pull quick demographic data, but there's a ton of other resources that you can use to find the same type of data. And then we use Google Earth Pro, which is a free desktop app for quick drawing of these concentric radii. So here is an example. Here's a SiteWise mobile app. I just dropped a pin on Danville, Illinois at the facility. And because this is a more rural area, we're going to run a 5 mile trade area on it. Here are the demographics, the population, the age, the number of households, how many of those housing units are owner occupied, how many are renter occupied, because usually renters are going to be the ones that use our facilities more often than homeowners. But homeowners, as you saw before, still use quite a bit of storage. And then here is what Google Earth Pro looks like. So what I do is I draw these concentric circles using this little measuring tool. It allows me to create some radii at different increments. So as you can see here, I have a 1 mile, a 2 mile, a 3 mile, and a 5 mile radius drawn around here. So the next thing we like to look at is population growth. Is there a steady population growth, or is there going to be some event coming to the area that will increase the speed at which the population is growing? And so with Danville, what we found was there was a casino that was actually approved by Senate Bill 690. When this passed, this automatically started plans from developers to start building more housing units. Obviously, the people that are going to construct the casino will be moving there. And this brings a lot of, what's the word I'm looking for? More transient populations into the area. Usually people will travel from nearby cities and towns to get to the casino. The workers themselves will usually not live in the city that the casino is a part of, and they'll actually commute in. This is super evident when you look at, say, places like Las Vegas or Branson, Missouri. You'll actually have, people from California flying into Las Vegas just to work for the weekend and then flying back out. And these types of people will usually, it's cheaper for them to just rent a storage unit where they keep changes of clothes and materials and whatever they need, as opposed to renting a place in two areas. So let's look at the demographics of the subject property. The median household income in the area was $39,000. The total population in that trade area was about 35,000 people, which equates to about 16,000 housing units. And population growth is evident based on the new casino that was approved. As a rule of thumb, for your first facility, you're going to want to select locations and sites that have a median household income of roughly $45,000 or more. You just want to make sure that you're not going into areas that are too impoverished, because then those people cannot afford self-storage. Self-storage is not a basic necessity of life. It's pretty darn close. But if you can't even afford to, go buy food, why would you afford to, rent an additional 100 square feet for things that you're buying? We're also looking for diverse industry. You don't want to fall into the trap that a lot of secondary businesses fell into when the auto industry collapsed. So you want to make sure that if one of the employers leaves, that there's still enough employers in the area so that the market that you're buying in does not turn into a ghost town. And then super important is you want a strong residential presence, especially if it's dense residential, apartment buildings, planned unit developments, townhomes, dense subdivisions. These are all great signs for self-storage. And the last thing we like to look at is forecasted population growth. This is not always necessary, but is a good thing to have. So we covered the traffic counts. We covered our demand drivers and demographics. Now let's look at how we do competition studies. We use Google Earth Pro to create this trade area and to then identify those competitors. We find out what those competitor occupancies are and what their rates. The reason we do this is because then it helps us identify which one of these competitors are expanding and doing well, which ones are stabilized and are mature, and which of the facilities are struggling. And if so, why are they expanding or struggling? So let's go ahead and take a look at our subject property, American Self Storage, here in Danville, Illinois. And you can see we have a competitor very close. Hillary Mini Storage is the closest competitor. It's inside of the 1 mile trade area. You got to realize that because this is so close to our facility, the 1 mile trade area is going to have a very large supply index, which we'll cover in a little bit here. Then you can see the closest competitors then are a little bit farther away. You have Tilton Mini Warehouse, Palmer Storage, Danville Storage, and then you have Extra Space Storage. Extra Space, that's a great thing to see because that means that a REIT, a real estate investment trust, which usually invest on timelines of 10 to 30 years, as opposed to my timelines, which are usually 3 to 7 years, they see that demand is going to increase over that timeline. So that's usually good news for us as a non-REIT investor operator. So how do we do this competition study? Well, we secret shop. So what we'll do is we'll call all the competitors. We'll ask them what their rates are. If they have a website where they post their rates, we'll ask them what occupancy they're at. If they're hesitant to give us the occupancy, we'll just ask them, hey, Are you above 90%? And if it's a yes, that's usually a good sign for us. We'll do a physical secret shopping. We'll actually go to the facility and we'll ask the manager to show us around or ask if we can maybe walk around the facility before we decide to rent there. And then we'll count the amount of locks on the units. We'll count the number of manager locks, which are usually a different color, usually red. Those manager locks will show if it's only the manager lock on the unit, that means it's an empty unit. If it's the manager lock on a unit plus another regular colored lock, that usually means that there is an overlock because the tenant hasn't been paying their rent. And then we'll double check the numbers by paying for a feasibility study. One of the people that we like to use is Bob Copper. These feasibility studies are usually required by banks when you're buying facilities, especially if they're larger facilities. And these will usually run you about $5,000 to $10,000, but you don't usually pay for this until you know without a doubt that you're going to be moving forward with this property. So let's look at the competition study for Danville self-storage or American self-storage here. So as you can see here, the closest 5 competitors, all within a 5-mile trade area. And what I want you to realize and look here is you can see that our closest competitors are at 98+% occupancy. That's huge. That tells me 2 things. Number one, that tells me that there's a lot of pent-up demand in the area. And number 2, what it tells me is that there is that the market is not pricing high enough. You never really want to go above 90% occupancy because that means that you're not charging high enough on rents. Now you can also see below that Danville storage is at 31.2 or 31.8%, and the Extra Space is at 20%. But the reason why is because Danville storage recently tripled the size of their facility because business was so good. And then Extra Space, which is the REIT, they came in and they built a new facility because they see growth in the future. Like I said before, rule of thumb is you want to be at about 90+% occupancy, which means that there's unmet demand in the market. New developments by large REITs is a very good sign. That helps not only the market, but it also helps your facility because the REITs are usually going to spend a ton of money on their marketing campaigns. And what you can do is just undercut the REIT by $3 to $5 per unit, and all the marketing they spend on the internet, those tenants will see that you're just slightly cheaper than the REIT, and they'll actually go to your facility even though you didn't pay for any of that traffic. When you see existing competitors expanding, that's also a good sign. That means there's a lot of demand that hasn't been met yet. All right, so now we've covered traffic counts, demand drivers, and demographics. We just finished the competition study, which was favorable. Now let's look at kind of the bread and butter of a self-storage investor, and that's the supply index number, which is an analysis of supply and demand. It's actually a ratio. So the supply index number, what is it? Well, it's the measure of supply and demand in the market, and it's calculated using the current amount of self-storage in the area divided by the population in your trade area. So an easy way to write this equation is supply index number equals net rentable square feet per capita in the trade area. The reason it's the net rentable square feet is because you may have a large Class A facility, a 3rd generation facility that's all internal, such as Extra Space in this market. And 30% of that area is actually used for offices and hallways and utility closets and bathrooms. So you actually lose a little bit of efficiency. So let's go ahead and look at the supply, some just general information about supply index. The national equilibrium is about 5.83 net rentable square feet per capita. The supply index, it changes though based off of density type. So for example, if you're in the city center, if you're in downtown Chicago and on a 1 acre property there is a skyscraper, and there's 1,000 people in that skyscraper, your supply index number is going to be naturally higher. So it's not uncommon to see 12, 13, 14 net rentable square feet per capita in these, urban city centers, high density areas. Now, when you look at, say, a rural area, there may be one person every 3 acres. So those supply index numbers will be much lower. They'll be in the 4 or the 5 or the 6 net rentable square feet per person. So we usually like to aim for properties that are sub 5 on the supply index. But if we find one that's sub 3, that's a slam dunk deal. Usually, if there's a deal that all of a sudden, once we're done doing the underwriting, we see that it's 3 or below on the supply index, we'll immediately send earnest money and a signed contract for that property because we just want to lock it up. These deals are very hard to find. So how do we find this supply index number? Well, the very first thing is we go back to our old friend Google Earth Pro, and we do a desktop underwrite. We first find the net rentable square feet for each competitor using a measuring tool, and I'll show you how to do that. So let's go ahead and look at Hillary Mini Storage, which was the closest competitor just down the block there. So what you'll do is you'll go ahead and click on this little button here. That is a polygon tool, and that will allow you to measure the outline of these buildings. So let's go ahead and measure this little building here. And you can see once you finish the polygon, it'll tell you exactly how many square feet that building is. Now, all these buildings look like they were built pretty much the same. So you can just multiply that by 5, and that will be your net rentable square foot for this competitor. But if the buildings are different sizes, which is very usual, then you can just measure each one of these and add them up. Now, there is one thing to know, which I kind of touched on slightly, is for climate controlled storage, you need to remove about 30% of the gross square footage towards loss so that you can get a true number for the supply. So let's use the example of that REIT that's in our market, Extra Space Storage. Their gross square footage is 78,000, which means that their net rentable square footage is probably around 54 to 55,000. And I'll show you how we did that. So here is the Google Earth Pro again. There's Extra Space Storage. I actually cut out a little bit of this section because this is a gym. I actually walked into the gym and just walked at paces just to see how far back they went. And then this used to be an old grocery store. So they converted this here. So what you're going to do is you're going to measure that space. You can see it's 78,000. Then you multiply that by 70%, or you remove 30% of that, and that will give you your net rentable square feet. So let's look at the competition study for this subject property here in Danville. Here are our 5 closest competitors with their address, the type of property they are, distance, if they're climate controlled or non-climate controlled, to see if we have a similar product or a dissimilar product. And then the total net rentable square footage that you can see right here. So that's after I did all the calculations on Google Earth. Then what you do is you go ahead and take the population in that area and divide it by the concentric circles, the net rentable square feet in each one of those circles. So for example, make sure to look at the geography for the appropriate trade area. So this area, we're not going to use a 1-mile trade area. We're not even going to use a 3-mile trade area because that's just too small for how rural of an area this is. So we're going to use a 5 to a 10-mile trade area for this type of property. And what you can see is once we divide the net rentable square feet by the population in each one of these concentric radii, you'll see that the supply index numbers are coming out pretty favorable. So in the 5-mile radius, you're looking at about a 6.1. And in the 10-mile radius, you're looking at about a 5.1, which meets our numbers. Now, again, remember I said, because Hillary Mini Storage was so close to our facility and then there was no other facilities for the next 3 miles, you can see that our 3-mile net rentable square footage is high compared to the population, which is producing a supply index of about 9, which, if I was in a suburb and I saw 9 in that 3-mile radius, I probably would not buy that facility. Okay, so we got our supply index number. What does this mean? Well, like I said, the 3-mile supply index number is concerning. Why is that? That's because there's only that one facility that's right next to ours. But how do we mitigate against seeing some high numbers? Well, one of the things you can do is you can purchase that closest competitor to then control the entire west side of that market. And that's actually one of the things that we're doing right now with this facility. Another thing you could do is just purchase at a high cap rate. One of the things is just because the supply index number is high doesn't mean that that isn't a good investment if you can get it at a rate that makes sense. So if we're assuming there isn't going to be any more growth that we could put to this facility, we're going to need to buy it at a higher annual return or a cap rate. Now, remember, a cap rate is the net operating income divided by the purchase price and any improvements that you have to do into the property. We like the 5 to 10 miles supply index. Those are much better. And the location of the competition is a plus because they're all kind of clustered together, leaving a large part of the market for us. All right, so now let's go over the agenda here. So we did the traffic counts. We got the demand drivers and demographics. We just did the competition study. We figured out our supply index number. It is favorable. It needs slight mitigation. Now let's look at the actual property itself. Now, we will never get to this point unless a property already hits pretty favorable on these first 4 topics here. So with a property analysis, what are the things that we're looking for? The very first thing is we're looking at the unit mix. That means the types of properties or the types of storage units, the size and what they rent for. The financials of the property, of course, because this is a commercial grade asset, it's valued based off of the income generating potential. We're going to be looking at the condition of the structure itself. And then we're also going to be looking for any type of value add opportunities. So when I see storage facilities like this, I don't get scared. I actually get excited. That to me looks like money. That looks like a lot of value add I can do, a lot of appreciation I can force into the property. So let's go ahead and look at the unit mix of this property here. So we want to look at the unit mix because we want to make sure that it's appropriate for the area that it's in. So for example, because this is a rural area, usually the types of units that are more popular for these geographies are going to be larger units. These are going to be tenants or customers that are storing ATVs or boats or large equipment, maybe tractor. Maybe they're a small business and it's a machine shop or a wood cutting shop. Now, if you're, say, in an urban core like downtown Chicago, your larger units, those 30 by 30 or those 10 by 20s that most people in the rural areas like, those will just be too large for the urban core. The smaller units are the ones that are more advantageous in these areas, usually the 5 by 5 or the 5 by 10 foot, so 25 to 50 square feet as opposed to 300 to 600 square feet. And the nice thing too is the smaller the unit, the higher per square foot cost you can charge on rent. The next thing we do is we look at the rents of that facility versus what the market rent is to see if there's any opportunity to raise rents. Now with this Danville self-storage, there is not that opportunity. What we found out is right before we bought the facility, they had actually raised all the rent so they can get a higher price on the listing. So they are actually the ones that are leading the market when it comes to market rent or street rate. Now let's take a look at the financials. So because self-storage is a commercial asset, the value is based off of its income generating potential, not sales comparables. So unlike single family homes where if someone down the block sold for $50,000 less than what they're supposed to, and now your property is worth less because that is one of the comparables or the comps, self-storage, the only thing that it's based off is how much money does it produce on a given year. And that will be how you value it. What we like to do is look through the last 24 months of the profit and loss statements, and we like that to be a trailing profit and loss statement. So what that means is it breaks down the financials on a month-to-month basis for the last 24 months. This gives us a nice snapshot of the income expenses. It also allows us to view the trend. Are they increasing profitability? Are they decreasing in profitability? Why is that? Let's figure it out. Let's get a little bit deeper dive. So let's look at the financials of this subject property. So here is the income. It looks like they're at about 79% occupancy currently. And the net income that it's, or the effective gross income that's producing is about $170,000. Now let's take a look at the expenses. And you can see in total, there's about $67,000 in expenses when we looked at the last 24 months or last 12 months of financials, whatever was available to us. And then you just subtract the expenses from the income, and that gives you your net operating income. And this is how you value your self-storage facility using a cap rate. So this facility nets about $102,000 a year. So what does that mean? Well, the property was listed for $800,000. We thought that was a reasonable price. So we went ahead and put under contract at $800,000. And after we did all of our numbers, you can see here that we're walking away with a 12.7% cap rate. That is a great number. So what cap rate is your annual return if you were to pay for the entire facility in cash. So that means that every year you're getting back $102,000 on the $800,000 that you invested. Now, if you use financing, which I recommend you use because it's leverage is the reason why real estate is such a great investment, then we start looking at the cash on cash return. So you can see on this facility, after putting 20% down, our cash on cash return was roughly 35%, which means that every 3 years, roughly, we are getting our entire down payment back in income. That's a very good return. So that means that every 3 years, we're basically doubling our investment. So we're talking about cap rates. What are typical cap rates that you should be shooting for? What are typical cap rates that we're buying properties for? So I put together this little matrix here, and it's based off of the type of market that you're in, either a primary, a secondary, or a tertiary market, and then the grading of the property itself. Is it a Class A property, which is a REIT grade, beautiful office building, multiple stories, climate control? Is it a C-class property like this Danville property, which is, all non-climate drive-up units, gravel? Or is it a B-class property? There's a combination of both. A B-class property usually has some exterior units that are drive-up, but it also has a little bit of climate control as well and a nice little office. So this Danville storage that we're underwriting right now would fall in the Class C, and it would also fall in a tertiary market. So that would put us right here we should be buying this for about an 8 to a 10% cap rate. Now we got it for a 12.7% cap rate, which means this is a great deal. This is a deal that we need to act fast on. So that's what we did. We put it under contract at $800,000. And then you'll see here the before and after. So we purchased it for $800,000. NOI was $102,000. Cap rate was 12.7. And the cash on cash return, or the cash return on investment, CROI, was 35%. Now, once you look at the facility, once it's been stabilized, we use 36 months because that's what the banks prefer to see. But usually we can turn these facilities around in about 12 to 18 months. The terminal value on this property will be $1.35 million. The NOI will increase to $131,000. That means that our internal cap rate will be 16.4%. That's the NOI divided by what we purchased it. So $131,000 divided by $800,000. That means that the cash return on investment, once we look at it with leverage, is actually 52.8%. That means that every 2 years we are doubling our money, or every 2 years, we're getting our down payment back. That's the power of leverage of real estate. And if we decide to sell this once it's stabilized, we will experience about a $675,000 profit. So not too bad for 1 to 3 years of work. Make a quick $600,000, $700,000. All right. So now let's take a look at the condition of the property and what we look for. The main types of improvements or deferred maintenance that you'll be looking at when you're walking one of these facilities or looking at photos of these facilities are the condition of the doors. Do they need to be painted? Do they need to be replaced? Are there dents? The door springs. So these are heavy steel doors. If the springs break, it's almost impossible to lift it with your bare hands. So these springs help quite a bit. And these are the things that the springs usually need to be replaced every 5 to 10 years on each door. The latches that keep the lockers locked, those start to rust and need to be replaced so that nobody can break them. The gutters, because this is real estate, you want to make sure that you're guiding the water away from the property so that it doesn't break down the foundation or the concrete slab that it's on. Bollards. Bollards are these concrete poles that are usually at the corners of each of the buildings so that when someone's backing up, they don't accidentally run into the corner and dent it. What's the pavement condition like? Is it gravel? Does it need to have asphalt on it? Do you need to put concrete down? Is it overgrown with grass and weeds? Do you need to spray some herbicide to take care of that so it looks a lot nicer? And then, like I said before, if they didn't have bollards, there's probably a couple dents in the metal, either in the doors or on the sides of the building that need to be buffed out just to make them look nicer. And then what's the condition of the paint? Is it weathered? Is it chipped? Do we need to repaint so that we make sure the metal doesn't rust? These are all things that we look for when we're walking through these properties. Okay, and then last but not least, let's look at how we do these value adds. So I'm going to list off a few of the value adds that we always look for when we're buying properties. First is there ability to increase rents? Are the rents below market? If we're charging, say, $12 a square foot per year, but all the competitors are at $18 a square foot, there's a huge opportunity for us to go and increase our revenue by 33%. And that usually doesn't cost you anything other than some postage and a couple letters to send out to the customers. You can add ancillary profit centers. You can decrease the expenses. You can increase or create an online presence if they don't have one. Remember what I said, 60% of our customers now are coming from this little guy right here. But if you can't find our self-storage facility on your phone, then we're losing so much potential revenue that's just going to our competitors. We like to transition from cash and checks to automatic payments. This allows us to make sure that tenants are paying on time. We will usually charge some type of premium or even give people a discount if they're willing to go to like an auto debit or put their credit card information in or an ACH payment. We'll look at what type of physical improvements we can make to the existing property. And then we'll look at what are the potential opportunities to expand the facility. So say you've done all the things above and you're still floating at 100% occupancy. That means it's time to build more storage. And then the last thing, which is kind of like a bonus, the last two items here would be to rectify your accounts receivable and to conduct auctions. And then to monopolize the market if you have the opportunity to do so. So let's go into each one of these a little bit more in depth. So let's look at rent increases in below market. In the mid to late 80s is when there was a huge boom in self-storage facilities being built, just because of the cheap cost of materials, cheap cost of labor. People were starting to become more wealthy and were buying more things and they needed places to store those things. So what you found is that a lot of these first generation drive-up facilities were built during that time. Now, a lot of these owners, especially these mom and pop owners, they have this policy of, whatever your rate was when you moved into my facility, even if it was 10, 15 years ago, that's what your rate's going to be for life, because they just don't want to deal with, or maybe they just don't want to rock the boat by increasing the rent on their tenants annually. So this is an opportunity for you to come in and capture all of that value. So what we like to do is, as soon as we buy a new facility, we'll bring all the existing customers up to 95% of market rates, just so that we're still giving them a deal so they don't have to go anywhere else. And then any new clients that are coming in, we'll charge them 100 to 105% of market rent, especially when the competitors are over 90% occupancy. That means that there is demand that has been unmet in that market. Now let's look at some of the ancillary profit centers that you can add to your self-storage facility. Being able to collect rent is just one way you can make money off of self-storage facilities, but there's a ton of other ways that you can collect rent as well, or collect income. So one is by storing cars, RVs, and boats. You can sell locks. You can sell renter's insurance and actually keep 60 to 80% of the insurance premium each month. You can sell moving supplies, packaging materials. You can offer a small FedEx pickup and drop-off location. You can offer printing services, scanning services. You can rent a small 10 by 10 or 15 by 15 foot area on your land to a cell tower. Especially if you're in a rural market that has a gap in coverage, these are some of the best types of what I call mailbox money you can have out there, because they come build it, and then for the rest of the life of the cell tower, they just send you, they'll auto deposit $1,000 to $5,000 a month rent into your account. You can build a billboard, and with those billboards, not only can you advertise your storage facility, but you can also advertise other people's companies, especially if you're on a high traffic road. You can do specialty storage. You can store wine. You can store art. These types of specialty storage, you can usually charge double to triple the per square foot cost than you can with just regular goods being stored. You can have truck rentals like U-Haul and keep a large portion of the rent from those trucks. You can create private mailboxes for people to use. You can offer propane filling, ATMs, and collect a fee off of the ATMs, vending machines. All of these things can be put in and managed by someone else so that you just collect the income that comes off of it. The next thing you can do is, if you're done increasing income, another way to make more money is by decreasing your expenses. So one of the things that we like to do immediately is to contest the property taxes. Usually these self-storage owners have never fought their county because they didn't know that they can fight them on the property taxes. But usually you can get about a 30% reduction in the property tax bill. You get multiple insurance quotes for the property insurance. We have found that on average, we're able to reduce the insurance cost by 30 to 50% per year. We remove any type of superfluous utilities and nice to haves. There's no reason that your manager needs cable television. There's no reason that your manager needs a dedicated phone. You can just create a call rail number that ports to their cell phone. There's no reason that each one of these units needs electricity to it. So if there's electricity each of these units, cut it off. Online presence and payments. One of the biggest value adds that we do when we buy a new facility, especially from a mom and pop operator, is we create a whole new website with the ability for tenants to buy storage online with a credit card, make reservations, check availability, move in, move out. It just makes it a lot easier, because then you don't have to hire as many people to manage the facility. It's all done online, and it allows you to capture a larger audience of customers. We tell people that we no longer accept cash payments because it causes a safety concern for the managers and also for our clientele. Now, there are some states where you're not allowed to do this. You have to accept cash. But what we'll do is we'll charge a fee for cashing physical checks that are mailed in, or for taking cash payments, because that takes extra time and cost to go process that, as opposed to just having somebody give us their credit card information that we can set up on an auto recurring billing each month, and they don't even have to worry about it. Now let's look at some of the physical improvements you can do after you've done all these non-physical improvements. Those non-physical improvements are usually very cheap to do. Once you get through all of those, then you want to go through the physical improvements where you may have to borrow some money or take some money out of the property to build these things. So, for example, here is a typical physical improvement that we like to do in our facilities. We will add security fencing. We will add keypad entrance and exit through that gate so that we always know who's in the facility, what time they got in, what time they left, in case there's any type of vandalism or attempted theft. What's also nice about the keypad entry and exit is if a tenant is late on rent, their keypad code no longer works, and they won't even be able to get into the facility, let alone get to their overlocked unit. Then we add these payment kiosks right outside the gate. So for example, say you forgot to pay your rent and you can't get into the facility to open your unit, you can just walk over to one of these kiosks and you can pay for your unit right there, and it'll automatically open up your keypad code so that you can get in. The nice thing about these kiosks is that you can also rent new units. You can take payments in cash, credit, check. You can buy locks through these little ATMs. You can buy tenant insurance through these, which we also get to keep, 60 to 80% of that premium. Another thing that we like to do is upgrade the pavement, paint all the units, install those concrete bollards, fix any roofs, repair roofs, get larger signage or repair the signage that's currently out there. These are all things that you can think about doing once you've gone through the non-physical value adds. And now say you've done all that, but people are still calling you every day. They still want units, but you're 100% full and you've raised the rents as high as you can go. Well, then it's time to look at expanding the facility. So there's two ways to expand the facility. One way is to actually build additional buildings, but another way, which is much cheaper and a way that we like to do it, is you can actually buy these modular units. They're delivered usually with a crane or with a forklift. You could put them onto the property. And the nice thing is those things start producing immediate revenue, and you don't even have to pay out of pocket for these. There's a lot of equipment financing companies that will give you 100% financing on these modular units, maybe allow you to pay them off over 7 years. And the nice thing about these modular units is because they're not permanent structures, they do not increase your property taxes. They do not increase your assessed value. Once you put these up, as you start getting them filled and you start getting additional revenue, then you can start construction on permanent structures. Because when you go to sell the property, you usually won't get credit for these modular units. So you want some type of permanent structure to capture that value. Another thing we can do is rectify accounts receivable. So what do I mean by that? Well, many of these mom and pop owners, they're super lenient on money that's owed to them. They say, hey, Bill, you've been renting from me for 5 years. Don't worry if you're a couple months late. Just, send it to me when you have it. What we usually do is the day we take over a facility is we'll send out auction notices to anyone that owes money. And we're willing to settle on those properties. So say somebody owes $1,000, but they only have $500 to pay towards the unit. We'll say, hey, we'll take the $500 because when we initially bought this property, we were assuming we were going to get no money for those units. So any type of settlement is extra cash in our pocket. You can also add large fees for the auction. You can have an auction fee and a lien fee and a clean out fee. These are all fees that you can charge on top of what is owed. In addition to actually hosting these auctions, we start enforcing strict late fees, and we raise the late fees to the state statutory maximum. A lot of these mom and pop owners, they won't charge any late fees. So what we'll do is we'll say, hey, if rent is due on the 1st of the month, and if you don't pay by the 5th of the month, we'll give you a grace period. Then we're going to charge you $15 or 15% of your unit's rent, whichever is larger, for every month that you're late. And that is also additional income that we didn't account for when underwriting these facilities. And then last but not least, once you've done all of that, then you can start looking at monopolizing the market. So for example, you can see our facility there, the subject property, American Self-Storage. And right down the street, you have Hillary Mini Storage. So what we did is we went up there and we made an offer on their property. And we're currently working through all the due diligence right now. What this allows us to do is raise the market rents because we are now basically controlling an entire part of this market. It allows us to drop operational costs because we don't need two managers now. We can use one manager that gets a golf cart that goes back and forth between these two facilities. So in summary, what we covered today is how to underwrite a self-storage facility. First, we looked at the traffic counts. We wanted to make sure that they were high enough to support the demand. We looked at the demand drivers and demographics. What was the median income? What was the population? Was this surrounded by dense residential? We looked at the competition study. Were the competitors at full occupancy? Were they charging high rates? Is there additional demand in the market? We looked at the supply index number, which was the supply and demand analysis. And we got to that by dividing the net rentable square feet by the population in that trade area. And then last but not least, we looked at the property analysis, which was very favorable. And we looked at the numbers and the condition and the value add opportunities. So if you would like to learn more about self-storage, feel free to hit me up, The Storage Stud. You can go to our website, thestoragestud.com, or you can shoot me an email at info@titanwealthgroup.com. Thank you very much.